is Ken Adams, and welcome to the 2016 election candidates show. And we're going to be talking to all the city candidates, including mayor and the city council races. And today we have Matt Ausec, who's running for the 5th Ward in the city of Salem for city council. So welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you, Ken. Good to be here.
And so what convinced you to run for city office, this big undertaking?
So my profession and passion and purpose are all public service. And so I've been serving in state government for quite a few years, and more recently was looking to become more active in city government in some way to augment the state service. And so as I looked into it and learned that Diana Dickey was no longer running for this ward, it became of interest to mine. So I talked to some people who I know about what it would take to fill the position, as well as run for the position, and got a lot of support and information on how I would be a fit for that position. And so I was very excited and honored with that support, and was glad to be able to jump into the race. So.
Well, yeah, and there's a difference between running for election and then actually doing the work, because sometimes those are different skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
But as an analyst, you're used to dealing with information that staff, in this case, would be providing you, and be able to go through it and decide what makes the most sense, because you're used to analyzing data.
Right, and instead of this time making a recommendation to a decision maker, I would be the decision maker myself. So
In setting policy
Mm-hmm.
based on information that you're getting.
right.
So there's a number of issues that I'm interested in, and the big one is the infrastructure projects they're talking about. And that's the Salem, the new Salem Police Facility, along with the library and City Hall. Those are issues that I think need to be addressed and maybe long overdue, and also the third bridge. So what is your position on the new police facility, as well as the retrofitting of City Hall and the library?
Well, to start with, the police facility does need to be modernized and updated. And there was a stakeholder group put together to analyze that situation and make a recommendation to the city council. And their recommendation was about 75,000 square foot of space was needed for the police station. And then the city paid some consultants, hired some consultants to go out and do some more investigation and come back with a proposal. And that proposal was about double the size for the police station. And what I believe is that shows that we had our stakeholder involvement and engagement, and yet we still are looking for more spending and more size, where I believe what we could use is, instead of trying to project for all the future growth and build it all in one location downtown, is to rather to consider things that other cities like Eugene do and have substations, so that while we can have a more modern police station downtown, we can also have locations where the police are more connected to the community by virtue of having more of a presence, and have the growth can be more efficiently controlled by having the substations in places that aren't so expensive and don't require massive building projects. So as far as the library retrofit, as you were speaking of, I believe that's long overdue and is an important safety concern. So one of the things that the city council has considered is potentially putting those two, the police station and the retrofit, together in a bond, but that was dismissed because it would be so expensive. But in my opinion, if we reduce the cost of the police station by using this different methodology for building the modern and preparing for the growth, then both could be put together in a way that would be a successful bond that people could appreciate the need for those those together, and it wouldn't grow out of proportion.
Well, yeah, and one of the issues that I think is that they still haven't done their survey, their scientific survey of the community to see how they feel about it. And this is probably another few weeks away before those, those surveys are completed. So I think that's an issue. But it's also, to me, an issue of their experience with building a police station 40 years ago that wasn't big enough and didn't allow for growth is impacting their next decision. And it's kind of reminds me of the military always building equipment for the last war instead of trying to look ahead to see what's coming and what's needed. And that's just the impression I get from listening to some of their comments, that they don't want to underbuild. And that seems to be the driving force for why now it's expanding to a much larger size.
And I hear that, but I just don't agree with that direction. I'm not implying that you do, but I do think that it makes sense to have a more engaged police force by having them more directly in the communities and through the substation model, and that also allows for a lot of flexibility and growth. You don't have to spend all your resources up front for one thing, but you also can grow at whatever paces Salem actually grows at.
And I kind of like your idea about having a presence in the various communities that we serve here in Salem, and not just, because if you think about your ward, it's a long way to downtown. Even the O'Brien site, it's a long way.
Right.
So, having a presence in your ward or closer to your ward would be helpful, I think, in getting people engaged. And I think that's a problem specific to your ward, where it's kind of an outlier. People don't think of it necessarily when they think of Salem, but it is part of Salem. And it's been neglected in a lot of ways. And I think having a police substation of some sort out there would help bridge that gap and make that ward feel more like part of the city.
Absolutely. And I think that's the major issue in my ward, is that the people there feel neglected. The more I talk to them, the more I hear that message exactly. And so that is the main current for this campaign, and for my interest in running, is to see that group, my neighborhood, the people in my neighborhood get those resources they need.
And I was going to talk about the third bridge, but actually, now that you've brought it up, because one of the things that happens in your ward too, that I've heard about, is the lack of sidewalks in a large portion of Ward 5. And I mean, I might complain about the sidewalks we do have in my ward, but at least there's sidewalks.
Yeah.
And in your ward, they just don't even have them.
Yeah.
In a lot of places. It's
something that obviously I've discovered knocking on doors and talking to people, is sometimes I'm just walking down the middle of the road, and some of the roads aren't exactly conducive for that. There's some faster driving going on in those roads where you get a little nervous that they're going to miss you, or you're going to have to step into what it amounts to a river or something along the side when it's raining, because there's not the best drainage in some of those locations. And so I've heard that from a lot of people. It comes back to the public safety being the most important issue in Ward 5 and in my neighborhood. Is a lot of the issues that people talk about, whether it's the police station or pedestrian safety or the need for more affordable housing and the presence of homeless that makes people unsafe, as well as being unsafe for the homeless themselves. That is the thread that seems to tie everything together, as well as you mentioned the retrofitting of the public buildings. Safety seems to be the thing that is the issue right now.
Yeah, and we've had a number of pedestrian deaths here in Salem. I don't know about your ward specific, but there's been 10 over about the last year. And I mean, to me, I see a lot of problems with people trying to walk in my ward crossing busier streets. And, if you don't have a sidewalk even, that presents a whole different set of problems for people that are trying to get around walking or some other.
And you mentioned that in my ward in particular, in the neighborhood, a lot of folks don't have cars as their main means of transportation. And so they're walking to the grocery store and walking back with arms full of groceries down the street. And it's not the safest way to get back and forth. And without public transportation outside of business hours, essentially, that they don't have that option either to get their groceries or to do errands outside of work hours.
So public transportation, okay, the hours are short, there's no weekend coverage, but is that served well in your community during regular hours even? Do they have enough buses?
Utilized, you mean, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, because that makes me curious. If most people don't have a vehicle, are they providing enough public transportation on those days that they do have public transportation? Is the question I guess I'm asking.
Well, I don't mean to imply that most of them don't have cars, but I do believe that there is a greater need. I've heard and isolated stories of people that are late for their jobs or for the things they need to attend because they don't have a regular access to the bus station or to a bus route. But I do think a lot of it does have to do with the hours that buses are available right now. And one of the things that I've heard as well is that people feel like the routes that do run through there aren't always accessing the places they need to go across town, essentially. So it's makes it more complicated for them.
So this is kind of a big issue, at least for your ward, but it also applies to the rest of the city, I think, because if there's no bus transportation on Saturday and Sunday, a lot of your lower wage workers who maybe can't afford a car and maybe they are working during the weekend don't really have a good way of getting to work, and as a result they're late, which doesn't help them in keeping a job. Right. So I would think that one of the issues that you'd like to see addressed on the city council is public transportation, trying to improve it. I know there's chariots and that's kind of a separate entity, but what role does the city have in trying to improve public transportation?
Well, as a city councilor, I think it's my role to provide leadership. And when the most recent measure failed, I believe that there was a lack of vocal support from city government on behalf of the people of the city who need this service. And I intend to bring that voice, in my case, and I hope to persuade others on the council as well, to bring that voice forward, that the people do want and need this service. And so hopefully we can help Chariots with any future measures with getting public support that way, so that people know that there's an opportunity there for them to help their own situation.
So that would be one way of alleviating that problem. So I'm going to circle back a little bit now to the third bridge, because, and this is my opinion, not yours, but it's mine, that we're spending approximately $60,000 plus a month on consulting fees and like that on the third bridge, which we've been doing for about 8 to 10 years. And I don't think we're any closer to getting that third bridge. I don't think that it's particularly wanted in the community. And it seems to me that if transportation is an issue, not just in your ward, but kind of citywide for the weekends, maybe some of that money should be going to Chariots to help for that. And then maybe they wouldn't have so much traffic problems too. Like if they had a commuter service between West Salem and downtown that would, just kind of transit people back and forth that live in West Salem and work downtown. To me, that seems like a better use of your money than building a third bridge.
Absolutely. And one of the main problems with the bridge is that the benefit of this bridge is not anywhere near the amount of cost, both financially of projections upwards of $700 or $800 million, which I don't think the public will be extremely responsive to when that does get placed in front of them. But also in terms of moving people out of their homes and any environmental impacts, which they still have to do an environmental impact statement for the federal governments. And so there's a lot of effort still left to even get there at the cost that you're already mentioning, which could just that $60,000 a month would make a huge difference for Chariots, for example. But not to mention the $800 million bridge itself. So I do believe that one of the things that we can do immediately without raising revenue or anything is to consider funding for things like those consultants and other areas of lower priority, and refocusing on public safety, which is the area that I feel has become a dominant need and has been getting cut short over time as the budget has shrunk a bit.
And you know, I've heard this before about the city budget shrinking over basically the last 20 years or so. And so how does that play out? I mean, how is that happening? Do you have thoughts on that?
Over the 20 years? Well, for one thing, what I've noticed, and at least more recently, I won't speak for 20 years ago exactly, but that the city council and the city government in general has tended to be averse to investment in the city to a greater extent than perhaps the people would like, so that services aren't being developed and provided because they cost money, and therefore the budget shrinks and such. And then you don't have a great argument if you ever want to increase the budget, because you're not providing services that you can point to say, we do this, wouldn't it be great if we expanded it, and so forth. But I do believe that we could, just by more wisely spending our money, alleviate some of these concerns that people have.
So another issue, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit, is pedestrian bike safety. And what do you see as being solutions for that problem? Because we've had a number of deaths. We also have had, I have my current city councilman has said that he drives down 17th and people are afraid to step out to cross the street. And that's something he's noticed.
Yeah.
So it's not just the deaths, it's people feeling safe crossing streets.
Yeah, and in addition to in my neighborhood especially needing sidewalks being a major issue, and bike lanes would be of great help, because in addition to walking, if you have a greater distance to go without a car, the bike is extremely helpful, of course. There are different approaches that I've seen presented to the city council, and I think it's taking some of each approach, where there's the approach of having more signage and more, I guess you would say, technology of lights and things, and then there's the approach of a campaign of public safety awareness, and there's this method that's been tried of simply having a signal before anybody crosses in the crosswalk. You just put your hand up and cars know that you're coming, and that's apparently been successful in several cities, in addition to having the crosswalk there to let people know to stop. And so there are infrastructure concerns that can be addressed, as well as educating people and drivers as well on how to behave in those situations where there aren't sidewalks and you can see people coming. Well, what if there's a car coming the other way? Do you stop? Do you swerve? What's the best approach? And so people feel prepared.
Yeah, well, one of the things I think drivers need to be aware of is the pedestrians do have the right of way in a crosswalk. And whether they put up their hand or not, as soon as they make the intention of crossing, you're supposed to slow down, not speed up. Because it's funny, because I was talking to someone over at the police station about that situation. They said, yeah, it happens to us all the time when we're trying cross Commercial, and they got those little flashing lights, and people will try to speed by before they can get to their lane or whatever. And so I think that's an education that has to be enforced by the city police, for one thing, to make sure that they are monitoring that situation, because it is, to me, we're having too many deaths and too many near accidents with pedestrians. And so I think you need to have some more enforcement going on, as well as educating people, because sometimes unless you have consequences for those kinds of behavior, you're going to keep doing them. So you know, we've talked about issues that I was kind of interested in. So what are the issues that you would like to see addressed or at City Council that you think need to be addressed? I know we've talked a lot about your area, but in general, what are some of the major issues that you see for the city of Salem and also for your ward, other ones that we haven't discussed already?
Well, part of it gets back to what we've already talked about with funding for the transit district and things. It's a sign people aren't feeling engaged and that their voice matters. And so one of the things that I want to do in City Council is to begin with some small projects that can be victories for the people and can recognize that things are getting done and that their voice is having an impact. And one way I see for my neighborhood is there's a project that's in a planning stage called the Portland Road corridor. And so in that neighborhood, there's already a plan, a proposed budget and such that needs to be developed and implemented in a way.
Is a key word.
Yes, exactly. And in a way that is respectful of the neighbors, not just what the city government sees as here's a way to increase business investment, but rather what is actually needed by the people who live in the neighborhood. And there are several, I think, very promising initiatives listed in the existing plan, along with some that aren't so great, but things like bringing more food into the area. Right now it's almost 2 miles to a grocery store in any direction. So as we mentioned, a lot of people are having to make that trek on foot or on bike, and that's a struggle, that's a hardship that people shouldn't have to face. And so one idea is to bring more merchants, and especially local produce and things like that, potentially a farmer's market and those kind of things, into the neighborhood so that there's more food options. There's a section of the plan for affordable housing. So I do think that there are smaller victories that we could win to earn the trust of the people when we then ask them for the bigger things, like funding for expanded transit, that they will be willing to engage with us as the government. And I just touched on it for a second there about the affordable housing, and I think one of the issues that's coming up across the city is the presence of homeless folks, people not having access to
Any
shelter,
kind of shelter.
safe shelter. And it's a public safety issue for those people that is extreme. And then on the side of people walking around town, they don't feel comfortable with people who are living on the streets as well. It makes everyone feel unsafe. And so it would be a very important step to try a new approach, and one approach that has proven successful, which is much more efficient than treating the homeless as often happens as a criminal type problem, is to do what's called Housing First initiative. And what's been found is that the reason so many people who lose their housing end up not getting back into housing is because there are barriers for all of the potential subsidies or affordable housing, whether it be substance abuse or wanting to stay with your family, your kids, your dog, you're keeping your family unit together. That's a barrier. We don't have housing for that type of group. It's for individuals mostly. And there's a lot of barriers that keep people out of affordable housing that exists. And Of course, we need more, just given the sheer number, the growth in Salem compared to the housing growth. But at the same time, by putting them in housing, it's much less expensive and much more safe for the people and that don't have homes, as well as the people who feel nervous walking the streets. And then you have the compassionate ability to bring the services to them in a single location, so that when they do need help with whether it's getting food stamps or benefits, or whether it's dealing with substance abuse issues, there's a place to reach them and to bring services to them and contact them. It's a much more successful approach.
Well, and one of the things I see too is that we need to have action, not just more studies going on. And I think that that is one of the things that we need to set, like, some goals, because right now we're over 6,000 units short of affordable housing here in Salem. So they need to make a start on that. And I would like to see that maybe some of these big projects that they use for condos would have had mixed, so that affordable housing was included, not just the high-end kind of things going on. But that's my view of how the city could spend its money more wisely, because if they're going to have big developments, let's include affordable housing in those. And they can still make their money, the developers and like that can make money on that, but we get something out of it as well. So, I mean, that's what I think just makes a lot more sense than giving subsidies to people to build not affordable housing.
Yeah, and I believe there is an option for builders that if they include a certain number of units of affordable housing, that they can build larger projects as well. So it's kind of, there's already kind of an incentive there. It's just not always used. So maybe something to back that up and support that.
Yeah, and like the Oregon State Police are going to be vacating a site on Portland Road, so they need to think about what they're going to put in there. So it's not a particularly big space, but it does provide some space. I don't know what their plans are.
I don't know.
Okay. So is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to talk about? We only have about a minute left. And
I guess I would just like to say that from going around and meeting people, and from going to neighborhood association meetings, just hearing the stories of the tagging and the drug dealing that's going on as a way of life, as sort of out in the open. There's no hiding. It's really causing consternation for people in my neighborhood, and they feel like they have to deal with they're having to deal with how to prevent this from happening. It's one thing to go and clean up the graffiti off their house once it's there, but how do I prevent it from coming back? And part of that is addressing the open sale of drugs everywhere.
okay, well, Matt, I want to thank you for coming in and joining
you.
us, because I think it is important that people know who's running for office and get
I
a
agree.
chance to talk to them about it. So come back next time.
Thank you.